Hey guys, welcome to Cyber Platter. Let's see the question for today. What is access control? Access control is a security mechanism which will determine who can access a specific resource and what actions can they perform on that resource. It usually involves rules and policies to determine which user has access to what resources and what actions are they authorized to perform. So in simple terms, access control involves verifying who you are, okay, and determining what you are allowed to do, and based on that, giving you permissions to perform those actions on the resources. For example, right, suppose say you're logging into your email accounts. First thing is it'll ask you for your user ID and then password. This is to verify your identity. Then the system checks to see what resources and actions that you are authorized to access based on your user account, what are the settings that you have set. Okay. Once this is done, the system gives you the permission to access your email and perform any actions that you're authorized to do. Like, for example, sending the emails, receiving the messages, right? So we use something called as access control models to determine who can access a specific resource and what are the actions that they can perform. This is a framework that is usually used in authentication and authorization systems. Okay. Now there are many different types of access control models. Okay. Let's see one by one. What are those? The main types are DAC and non-DAC systems. DAC is nothing but discretionary access control, and non-DAC is, as the name says, non-discretionary. In DAC model, it is a type of access control system where the owner or creator or data custodian decides who can access a resource and what level of access is granted. So the owner of a resource is the decision maker here. Suppose say you create a file, okay, naming file 1. You decide that user 1 can access this and has only read permissions on this file. And then there is user 2 who can read as well as write to this file. So you are the owner of this file and you are deciding what access will the other users have on this file. DAC is implemented using access control lists on objects. Access control list is nothing but the list of permissions associated with a resource. So access control list specifies which users or processes or applications are granted access to the objects. DAC is a decentralized system, okay? Because the owners can change the ACL, that's it, the access control list, whenever they want. DAC is an identity-based model because it relies on the identity of the resource owner to determine the permissions, access permissions, and grant access based on the identity of the user. Like, for example, the owner of a file can assign permissions to individual users or groups based on their identity. So it means that the owner of the resource can decide which users can access it, what actions they can perform on it, and what level of access they have on that resource. Let's see the pros and cons of a DAC system. One of the advantages is that it is flexible because it allows the resource owners to grant or deny access to any user based on their discretion. This also provides fine-grained control over access permissions, okay? And it is also simple to implement as it does not require any complex rules, policies, or processes to control access to resources. This is also comparatively cost effective because it does not require any sophisticated software or hardware to implement access controls. Now let's look at the cons. First is the security risk. Like, for example, say the resource owner grants access to somebody that is untrustworthy or the users with malicious intent. This can result in unauthorized access or data theft, right? And there is a lack of central control here. That means DAC does not have a centralized control, like every resource owner sets their own access control lists, and this can lead to inconsistencies in security policies across an organization. And DAC can also be very challenging to manage in large organizations with many resources and users, as it becomes very challenging to keep track of all the access permissions that are granted. Now let's see what is non-discretionary access control model. In a non-doc model, right, the access to resources is centrally managed. That is, it is determined by a central authority. It is not up to the discretion of the resource owner to provide access here, okay? In non-DAC, the access are based on the policies and rules that are set up by a central authority. Let's see the pros and cons of non-DAC. Okay, first is that it provides better security than a DAC system, because the access to resources is based on some predefined set of security policies. Okay, and this makes it difficult for the users to access resources that they should not be accessing, and it provides consistent access control. Like we said, it is based on a centralized policies and rules, right? And this also makes it easier to manage, especially in large organizations with many users and resources. And non-DAC is more scalable compared to the DAC system, as it allows the organizations to easily add or remove users and resources without needing to modify the individual access controls. Okay. Then coming to the cons of non-DAC, it is not very flexible, and also it can be complex to implement because it requires centralized authority to manage access policies all across the resources and users, right? This can be challenging in larger organizations with many resources and users. To sum it up, non-DAC provides greater security and consistency, but it can be challenging to implement it and may limit flexibility. Okay, in DAC it is the opposite. It is flexible, it is easy to implement, but it has some security risks and challenges to manage in large organizations. So in non-DAC there are many different types, like MAC, that is mandatory access control; RBAC, that is role-based access control; ABAC, that is attribute based access control; rule-based access control; risk-based access control, right? We'll go through all of these one by one. The first non-DAC access control model that we'll discuss is RBAC, that is role-based access control. Here, the access to the resources is based on the user roles or job functions, like the name suggests, right? So users are assigned to roles based on their job responsibilities, and permissions are assigned to each role. And then the users are granted access to resources based on the permissions assigned to their role. RBAC is usually implemented using groups. For example, consider a hospital, okay? In hospital, we'll have doctors, nurses, admins, etc. So we can create groups for them. Say there is a doctor group, there is a nurse group, and there is an admin group. And each of these employee types will have different access requirements to the hospital resources, such as, the medical records, patient data, financial information. So based on the role, you add them to the groups, and then permissions are assigned to these groups. For say example, somebody who's in the doctor group, right? That is the employee with a doctor role might be granted permissions to view and edit medical records. But somebody in the nurse role can only view the medical records and cannot edit it. And the employees in the admin group can only see the financial information and will not have access to the medical records of any patients. RBAC helps to enforce least privilege principle, okay? As it ensures that the employees are only granted access to resources that they need to perform their job functions. This also prevents what is called as privilege creep. Privilege creep is the gradual accumulation of, unnecessary access privileges or excessive access privileges that are granted to any user over time. This usually, occurs when users change their roles within an organization or as their responsibilities evolve. Suppose, say, I join the organization as a customer service representative, and I'll have access to all the customer records. Now, over time, I'll decide, okay, I don't want to be a customer service representative and I'll move to a financial area. Now I have access to the customer records as well as I have access to the financial data. I don't need access to customer records anymore, but I need access to the financial data. So in RBAC, what happens? The roles and permissions are the permissions and rights are assigned based on your roles and not to the individuals. When it is assigned to an individual, it becomes difficult to identify and revoke all of the users' unneeded privileges. I was in the customer representative role before, and now I move on to the financial one. All the central authority needs to do is remove me from this role and add me to this, and I will be given the appropriate permissions, and my unnecessary permissions will be revoked. RBAC is very useful in dynamic environments with frequent employee changes, because admins can easily grant many permissions just by adding a new user to a group. So if you remember, in DAC, everything is controlled by the owners, and in non-DAC or in RBAC, everything is controlled by an administrator. There is another model called as TBAC as well. It is very similar to RBAC. T stands for tasks. Okay, that is task-based access control. In RBAC, the users are assigned roles, but in TBAC, the users are assigned their tasks. So the next non-DAC model is rule-based access control. Here, the access is provided based on a set of predefined rules, filters, restrictions. These rules are global rules, that is, it is applied to all the subjects, and these rules are defined by the system admin. A very common example of rule-based access control is a firewall, where the firewall filters network traffic based on some rules. The rules might be set to accept only certain type of traffic, like for example, allow only HTTP traffic and block everything else. Or the firewall might be configured to block traffic from certain, IP addresses and allow traffic only for specific ports. And then next we have attribute-based access control. This is an advanced implementation of rule-based access control. In rule-based access control, it is global, okay? It applies to all the subjects equally. But attributes ABAC is more specific. Like for example, say location. You're allowing access to file 1 to the users who are in the location, say US, and for all others, you're denying them. Many of the software-defined networking applications use attribute-based access control. Like for example, say only the users who are using company-provided laptops can access one of the internal networks. ABAC can be, complex to manage and enforce, but it provides fine-grained access. The next non-DAC model is mandatory access control, that is MAC model. Okay, this is usually used in high security environments like government, military. Here, the access is provided based on the classification labels. Users usually have labels assigned to them based on their clearance level. Okay, that is a form of privilege that is provided to that particular user. The objects also have labels which indicate their level of sensitivity. If you look at the US military system, it usually uses labels such as top secret, secret, confidential, okay, to classify their data. So all the top secret data, right, that can be accessed only by the people that have top secret clearance, and the top secret data cannot be accessed by secret and confidential level clearance. Okay, let's create a table to understand this better. So let's consider this top secret data, that is the label of file 1, file 2 and file 3. File 4, 5, 6 are secret data, 7, 8, 9 are confidential data. There are two different types of MAC model. There are two different types of MAC model. First is the hierarchical model and the other one is the compartmentalized model. In the hierarchical environment, right, if you have top secret data clearance, then you have access to all the files in your label, that is top secret data, and then you also have access to all the lower level access. Like for example, say you have access to secret data as well as confidential data. So if you have top secret level clearance, it will grant access to all the top secret data as well as secret and confidential data. That means if you have clearance in one level, then it grants you access to the subjects in that level as well as the lower levels. But you cannot access the upper level, higher level or upper level subjects. Okay. Suppose say you have secret clearance. Okay. Then you can access file 4, 5, 6 because it is in the same level, and 7, 8, 9 because it is in the lower confidential level. But you cannot access 1, 2 and 3 because it is in the higher level. Okay, that is with the hierarchical model. Now let's see what is compartmentalized model. Compartmentalized model, right? This enforces need to know principle. There is no relationship between these clearances or labels. Each domain represents a separate isolated compartment. Okay, if you have access, if you have top secret clearance, then you can only access 1, 2 and 3, and not even 1, 2 and 3. If 1 is required for your job, then you are accessing only file 1 and file 2 and 3 are not visible to you. Okay, if you have secret clearance, then maybe according to your job you're required to access only file 5 and 4 and 6 are not required. So that is when it enforces need to know principle. There is a hybrid model as well. This is a combination of both hierarchical and compartmentalized concepts. There is another DAC, non-DAC model, which is called as risk-based access control. This is a relatively new concept. Here usually we use real-time intelligence to gain what is happening, to gain visibility on what is happening, what is the context behind each login. Okay, whenever a user attempts to log in, right, many of the factors are analyzed. Like for example, something related to the device, like if this device was used by this user previously, is this a mobile device, did he ever log in from this device before? Another factor that it can look at is the location. Is it from home location? Is it from the office location? Has this location been used before? Or it can look at the network as well. Like, if this IP is a familiar IP, was there a login before using the same IP address? And then other factor to consider is the sensitivity. Like, for example, is the how important this file is, what is the clearance of this file. Based on the analysis of these factors, either the user can normally log in, like for example provide their user ID password, or sometimes it asks for more proof in the sense maybe it is asking for MFA, it is asking for OTPs, or it is asking you to register the device with the company portal. Something I forgot to mention here is MAC model is also called as lattice model. Okay, because it looks like this, because it looks like a lattice. Okay, so now we know what is access control, what are the different types of access control models, and the main ones are DAC and non-DAC. So now we know what is access control, what is an access control model, what are the different types. The main types are DAC and non-DAC. DAC is identity based. It is at the discretion of the owner to provide access to the resources. Non-DAC is centrally managed. It is mainly based on rules and policies. It has different types like MAC, RBAC, ABAC, rule based, risk based, right? And we saw role based is mainly based on the user's role in the organization. There is something very similar called as TBAC, which is based on the user tasks that are assigned to him. Then we have rule based access control, which is globally assigned to all the subjects, and it acts based on a set of predefined rules. And then we have attribute based access control. This is more advanced level of rule-based access control. It is rule-based is globally applied to everybody, but a attribute is more specific, okay, maybe like location it considers, or the working hours. It provides more fine-grained access control. Then we have mandatory access control, which is also called lattice access control. It is based on the labels. In this we have two types, hierarchical and compartmentalized. Compartmentalized access control provides need to know principle. Then we have risk-based access control. Here, when the user logs in, many factors are considered, either to allow a normal login with say user ID password, or it is asking for more proof or MFA, or it is asking for the device to be registered. Some of the factors that are analyzed in a risk-based access control are, device, the location, network, and sensitivity of the resource that is being accessed. So now you know how to answer these questions. If somebody in the interview asks this question, you should be comfortable to answer them. I will see you in the next video with another question. Until then, bye bye, have a great day, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.